Okay, thank you for the nice introduction, and thank you all for coming. So, my name is Tor. I come from a security company called Mnemonic. I think maybe many people haven't heard about us. We're a pure IT security company, working mainly in the Nordics, based out of Oslo. So we're about 200 people. I more or less grew up in my father's Unix lab, and so I've been playing around with computers and doing all kinds of stuff since I was this big. And eventually I got a PhD in crypto, and I started working full-time in security. And so, actually, Internet of Things is kind of funny. I just refurbished my bathroom at home. And it turns out that my new bathroom fan actually has an app. So I'm supposed to download an app and scan a QR code and use it to adjust the settings on the fan. So that's, I mean, those kinds of things are kind of surprising. So this talk is going to be divided into 3 main parts. I'll first set the stage by saying a few words about Internet of Things in 2018. Then I'm going to present the Watchout project, which is a project we've been doing on GPS watches for children, together with the Norwegian Consumer Council. We're going to have a look at how weak security actually puts children at risk, and tell a little bit about our experiences doing this work. Finally, we're going to conclude with some lessons learned. I don't think we're going to solve all the problems with IoT security today, but at least we're going to share a few ideas. So when I was planning this talk, it was kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly, like the movie, except that it's more like the bad, the ugly, the good. But hopefully it works out. So we see all these kinds of dodgy headlines, like, right, so smart bulbs blow a security fuse. Hacked robo-vacuum could spy on your home. Firmware update blunder bricks hundreds of home smart locks. These are just some headlines from the register over the last year or so. And you get the feeling that Internet of Things is more or less everywhere. So you even have a toilet IoT sensor. And this might be a great product. I'm not here to knock it or anything. It might be really good stuff. But you can't make this thing up. It's kind of a toilet IoT sensor. Valuable information that is currently flushed down the toilet. Who thinks of this stuff? It's amazing. So, do any of you know what these companies all have in common? All these companies were actually knocked offline by the distributed denial of service attack by the Mirai botnet a bit more than a year ago. And what happened? Who were actually in this botnet? It was smart devices. It was cameras, routers, printers, and so on, generating a tremendous amount of data flow, knocking core internet infrastructure off the web. By the way, the source code to Mirai is actually on GitHub, so anybody can grab it there. But let's look a bit below the surface. So this is an ESP8266 Wi-Fi controller. It's made in China. They've sold more than 100 million of them. 100 million of these devices. And they're dirt cheap. I think you can buy one of them for like $2 or $3. And obviously, if you want to buy 10,000, it's a lot cheaper per unit. And this is a complete Wi-Fi controller, TCP/IP stack, everything you need. So if you want to make some kind of do-it-yourself smart home project, you can buy one of these and just hook it up. But you also have more advanced devices. So this is a more or less complete working smartphone from Aliexpress. It's got everything. It's got the phone, it's got a GPS, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, camera, everything you need. And it's 20 bucks. And if you look at the chips inside them, they're very cheap. And I think a bit of the story here is that this stuff is totally commoditized. You have chipsets from MediaTek and many others that you can build these complete smart applications. And of course, you also have a lot of higher-end hardware as well. But at least on the low end, it's totally commoditized. And you find actually a lot of devices that are completely identical under the hood because it's the same chips, it's the same firmware. It's quite often the same vulnerabilities. So that's interesting. When I was making these slides last week, this story about Strava came up. How many of you use Strava? So they published a global heat map and showing basically user activities all over the world. And somebody pretty quickly figured out that you could use it to locate military bases in Syria and Afghanistan. And you could also actually use it to identify individual soldiers. So that's kind of interesting, right? And the fun thing about these data-driven services is that we don't just have to worry about this device security anymore. We actually also have to protect the data. And the data might be just as interesting as building a large botnet. So you get location data, voice data, camera data, all depending on what kind of device this is. And quite often you will see that it's kind of hard to figure out exactly which data is being collected, where it's being sent, what the terms of service are. And with GDPR coming right up, that's going to be interesting. So Mnemonic actually asked a few people last year about what they thought were the biggest security concerns for 2017 and the future. So this is a quote from Philip Reitinger in the Global Cyber Alliance. What is your biggest security concern? The Internet of Things. The combination of network complexity, orders of magnitude greater than now, along with connection to the physical world and weak on-device security capabilities, will increase risk exponentially. This is from Stephen Wilson in Europol, European Cybercrime Center. The development of IoT-based attacks is a major concern. This past year, we have seen a range of DDoS attacks from IoT-connected devices at a magnitude never experienced before. The scale, impact, and consequences of these attacks will only continue to grow. And I think that sort of sets the scene for what we've been doing in the Watch Out project as well. How many of you know Kayla? So Kayla is the doll that was banned in Germany because it could be used as a covert spy device. And this was a previous project from the Norwegian Consumer Council. So they're called Forbrukerrådet in Norwegian. They have a vision. I've taken the liberty of translating it, so I hope it's more or less correct. We empower consumers and provide opportunity to make good choices. And the company I work for, Mnemonic, is currently partnering with the Norwegian Consumer Council to provide technical expertise and to do analysis of smart consumer products. So they actually have a world-class team in this area, and we're having a lot of fun working with them. So Finn Myrstad, Gro Mette Moen, and Ayla Rauno, they're great people. On our side, it's been myself and a colleague of mine, Harrison Sand, who's been the main technical investigator, and a few others who have been working together with Forbrukerrådet, and we hope to make some interesting projects in the future as well. And so now we come to the smartwatches. So the idea here is basically quite simple. You can keep track of your kids. The pitch, this is your kid's first phone. Even if they're not old enough to have their own mobile phone, they can get one of these. And as a parent, you can track where they're going, and you can call them, talk to them. There's a few different functionalities depending on the exact model. So some devices have a camera, some do not. Some have an SOS button, so that if something bad happens, you can press the button to trigger some kind of alarm. You have geofencing, which means that if the watch leaves a certain geographic area, you get an automatic alert. All these kind of fun features. And so for these kind of devices, you really have some kind of expectation of safety and security. They're made for kids, and you can buy them in the regular shops. So they must be good, right? And besides, they're kind of expensive. In Norway, some of these models can cost as much as 30,000 Icelandic krona. Of course, you can also go to Aliexpress and get one for 10% of the price. This one is from Aliexpress. And so it's a kind of confusing, because you see all these different models, and you can have a hard time telling what's the difference. Is it, if you open it up and tear it apart, is it the same chips? Is it the same software? Is it the same firmware? Sometimes it is. So in the project, we looked at these 4 watches, which were all bought in stores in Norway. We also looked at a few other watches, like this one again from AliExpress. We actually bricked this one, so it doesn't work anymore. So, oops. Well, it was cheap. So the goal of our project was really to see if these 4 watches on the Norwegian market are secure and safe to use. And so I will tell you a bit more about the concept here. So basically, the watch will send data typically over 2G, sometimes 3G, to a backend service. And then you have a smartphone app that you use to pull the service API in the cloud and get the data. And so there are a few things here that could go wrong. One of the main issues we found was actually the process where you are pairing a device to the app. So let's say that you buy a GPS watch, and mom sets up her app on her smartphone, connects it to the watch, gets the data feed. And then dad wants to have access as well, so he takes his phone and tries to add it to the watch. This is actually security critical, because if somebody is able to pair their phone to a device which they are not supposed to access, then they will have complete control of that watch. They will get the location data, and they will get the opportunity to do voice control and all sorts of fun stuff. Another area of attack is the backend service. And when we did our testing, we mostly didn't try to hack these, basically because then we would be potentially intruding on something we did not own, and potentially we would see data that we weren't supposed to see. But there's no doubt that if you look at the software security and security vulnerabilities in web applications, you know that there's a pretty good chance that there are going to be vulnerabilities here as well. Then there's the watch interface, because the watch has a fully functional mobile stack. And we actually found that several of the watch models had an SMS command interface that you could use to change the behavior of the watch. And that interface would actually have a default password, for example, 00000 or 123456, which makes it really easy to get access if you know the phone number. And then there's the app and the data that's being collected, both by the watch and the app. So we tried to set up one of the apps, and I'm gonna use Gator as an example here. That's not because I want to knock Gator, but because they're a good example. So here we are trying to set up the app on Android, and well, it needs to access my identity, my contacts, my location, SMS, phone, photos, media, files, camera, microphone, Wi-Fi. Why? Why is this app collecting all this data? And this is the first thing that greets us before we've done anything. But so we try to register a watch, pair it with our app. So we're supposed to scan a QR code to get the information or you can just enter the IMEI code to get started. And so we scan, and suddenly all this information is pre-populated. Suddenly we have gotten pre-populated the child's name and the country and the phone number. So what's going on here? We haven't done anything. We've just identified the watch. So even without signing up, we discovered that we could find the phone number, we could find whitelisted phone numbers in the app, we could find the name of the user, probably the child, we could see the avatar, probably a picture of the child, and we could get geolocations. So that was sort of a depressing start. And after working on this for some while, we actually managed to get in and pair an unauthorized app with a watch. And we discovered there's no notification. There's no notification on the watch. There's no notification in the app. There's no email being sent. The original user has no clue that we have full access and we're tracking location. And then it turns out we can do quite a bit more as well. For example, we found a way to do location spoofing. How did this happen? We're in Norway. We're not in Siberia. And eventually, there was just so much we could do. We could set up access to the microphone so that we could listen, and also have two-way communication with the watch. And we discovered that there's no way to delete historical data. So even if you stopped using the app, the data would still be available. And basically, we got access to everything. And so after discussing with the vendors, and after discussing with Norwegian Consumer Council and the National Data Inspectorate, we went public in October last year. And it made some headlines. Smartwatches for kids are a total privacy nightmare. We even got on Good Morning America, which was kind of cool. And in the aftermath of this, again, the German Bundesnetzagentur actually took action. Or, as BBC would say it, Germany bans children's smartwatches. Well, not quite, but they banned some types of watches that could be used to illegally listen to conversations. And so we're done, right? Well, not quite. Because we looked at some of the responses from the vendors, and they really weren't all that good. So here's an email we got actually to our test account that said, yeah, it's a voluntary update to the watch. And your watch is going to work fine just without this. And to get this update, you should send us an email with your username and your password. So even though the vendors were saying that, yeah, we fixed all the holes, it's secure now, you can stop worrying, go back to work. So we did a little retest. And this time we just tested 2 of the devices, because we were kind of expecting that those 2 had the most problems in the first test, so they would probably have some more problems. And it turns out that we could repeat all the attacks from the first time. we also found voice messages in an unprotected cloud server for 4,000 users. So there was a new round of reports to the vendors and to the data protection authorities. And to their credit, they managed to lock down this server pretty quickly. And I think all the vendors got external companies to do security audits. So, but 3 of the vendors did get a letter from the data protection authorities saying that basically you should fix your stuff or you have to stop processing personal data. So the first vendor appears to have cleaned up most of their problems. The second one is still working on it. They've made some progress and they've gotten a deadline extension to April. The third vendor basically, they say they've stopped selling this watch because it's too hard to fix. So at the same time as we were doing this, the Norwegian Communications Authority also did an audit. And they're the ones responsible for radio frequency, radio communications and radio frequency emissions. And so they tested 18 different models and found that none of them were actually compliant with the EU Radio Equipment Directive. So there was lack of CE marking, lack of manufacturer information, lack of type designation, and missing documentation on basically safety testing for the watches. So not so good. So some people may think that this is all theoretical and this was just something we did in our lab, but that would be hard to replicate. And well, it turns out that's not the case. So actually, there was a Norwegian blogger who found several of the same security vulnerabilities in the Gator at the same time as we did, except that we published first. So, well, anyway, Roy Solberg, he has a great security blog and deserves a lot of credit for that work. There's also this guy on Twitter, Mish, who did some analysis of a GPS tracker device and published it on his blog in November. And that was not a GPS watch for kids. That was just a tracking device that you could plant in somebody's car or whatever and use it to follow them. And then the same guy on Evstykas on Twitter also did quite a large test of these back-end cloud servers and found out that there's a lot of security problems all over. So, trying to sum up, what have we been learning from this? Well, we were actually quite surprised, even as sort of cynical security professionals. I mainly work on enterprise security, and looking at these consumer devices was a new thing for me as well, and you're like shocked, because there's so much trouble. And there's also an information asymmetry. So it's very hard for regular consumers to cut through the bullshit. It's also a question that I don't think I have an answer for, which is really how, as an IoT device company, how can you differentiate on security? Because we encounter so much PR and so many claims that were simply not based on fact or simply wrong. And there's also the fact that you have these long supply chains. So basically, some of the companies don't really know the technology. They just buy it from China and bring it to market. And maybe they don't even have a good understanding of the security and safety requirements for consumer products. And so that makes it hard to make informed choices. And consumer device security differs from enterprise security in the sense that enterprises also have all these devices all over. But they have a better opportunity to invest in security internally. Whereas if my grandmother was buying a smart toy, well, what does she know? It looks nice in the store, right? So trying to sum up some of my thoughts on what people could be doing or should be doing. There's security and privacy for vendors and manufacturers. You need to really post requirements for your suppliers and make sure that the stuff that you are buying and reselling or bringing to market is actually well built. And you should be doing security testing, because if you haven't tested, how do you know? Another important point is to support security through the entire device lifecycle. So, I mean, typically you buy a smart device and it's supposed to last for 3, 4, 5 years, right? It may need to be updated, and you need to have some way to do that. That's regular people can do. I think finally it's important, at least from my perspective, that vendors act transparently, provide information, and provide a point of contact so that it's possible to start a discussion. For authorities and consumer advocates, I think it's important to keep up with new technologies and trends, engage with the community. We want to help, but we need to be able to make the right connections and enter into some kind of dialogue. And try to establish regulations, standards, create a level playing field where the good products have a chance to compete. For the research community, I think IoT is a very target-rich environment. It's easy to find interesting projects. And so I encourage security people to work on smart consumer devices, but consider also the impacts and ethics of what you're doing. And don't be evil. But so, as a consumer, what can you do? Panic! Well, don't panic, but it's useful to be aware of your privacy rights and demand transparency in terms of how data is collected and processed. For product safety and security, don't trust the vendor's claims. Try to get some kind of independent documentation. And don't be afraid to ask difficult questions. Don't give up. So that's it. Thank you very much. I'll be hanging around here today, mostly around the Sensa booth. So if you have any, we can't take questions right now, but if you have any questions, then please come see me.